There was a period of about 3 or 4 weeks, as I recall, where I had students invite me out to lunch and dinner almost every day. So there was a period of nearly a month there where lunch and dinner I didn't pay for nearly for a single. I think I didn't pay for a single meal for at least 3 weeks.
Hello there, and welcome to I Taught English Abroad, a podcast series by the TEFL org. This is our second series looking at an industry with countless brilliant stories, and our job is to bring them to you. Each week, we'll speak to someone who's taught English abroad and get some valuable insight. These are the stories of people who either grew up yearning to teach, changed careers later in life, or somewhere in between. We'll talk to people who've been all over the world and broadened their horizons by teaching online, the experienced, the brand new alike. We'll deal with the challenges of teaching, moving city, exploring new nations, building a career in TEFL, and so much more. So sit back and relax, as we'll take you across the globe with some of the most interesting voices the TEFL industry has to offer. Today, we're talking to Arthur Sanford III. An experienced TEFL teacher, and someone who many TEFL org graduates will know, Arthur's story is a perfect example of changing career and fortunes. From despondency in Portland during the global financial crisis, Arthur truly turned his life around, teaching across Asia, meeting his wife, and providing fantastic lessons for prospective TEFL teachers. Here's the story. All right, so I'm with Arthur Sanford, and just a bit of background. We're trying this recording for the third time now. We've incurred all sorts of problems, so I'm delighted to be joined by Arthur, and hopefully this recording holds out. So Arthur, thanks again for your patience. How are you, and whereabouts are you now?
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate being here. I'm currently in Vietnam doing some temporary teaching right now before I go back home to New York. Just decided to take a break and, because most of my work is online, I'm able to travel around a bit and do that. And I thought Vietnam would be a nice choice. And so far that's proven to be the case. And I've been enjoying it here greatly.
So your career is particularly interesting to me, and now you have that obvious association with the TEFL org, which brings everything into a nice sort of full circle. But I want to go right back to the start of your career. So you got your start, your start in your working life anyway was in a sort of care background. So before we get into the teaching side, what do you think? What was that experience like, first of all, and what attributes would you say you've brought from a care role to teaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did that for about 5 years, and at the time I was living in Portland, Oregon, and it was work that I enjoyed. It can be pretty arduous sometimes. It's just kind of baked in the system, and it's the nature of the work. But I'm just the kind of person that likes helping people and assisting them and teaching them skills that they need to get on better in life, and I think that's an important quality for a teacher as well. So at least that aspect of it, I'm pretty certain I brought that into my later teaching career.
Tell us about your background in language and especially in English, because you worked in care and then things became difficult. There was a lack of funding due to the global financial crisis. So had you taught before you put your background in care, and what sparked the interest in TEFL and teaching English?
Yeah, out of college, I did teach for 2 years. My parents have lived in Virginia for a long time now, and I decided to go back to that area to be near my family. Also, my wife at the time, she was from nearby in Maryland. We decided to move to that area, and I ended up teaching high school for a couple of years. But then we had to move for her work. That's how we ended up in Portland. And so because of the move, I just ended up not teaching in Oregon, because the standards and criteria are different there. That's how I got into care work. But then, you might remember I think it was October 2009, the first wave of the global recession hit. And I think there was another one in like January, February of next year. And so the funding just got completely cut for those kinds of services. I remember in Portland, which already has a pretty noticeable homeless problem. I just remember around that time just seeing even more and more of it on the streets, and then that affected my work as well. Lost a lot of the people I was working with because they ran out of funding, and so yeah, it got to the point where I was like, oh, okay, yeah, so it looks like this work is drying up, and there's not much of a future in it. So what am I going to do? And then I looked back, many years when I was teaching high school, and I said, oh yeah, I actually did like being a teacher. Maybe I could get back into that. And yeah, I just looked into it, and my mom was helping me out, like looking at different organizations, and which is very nice of her. And yeah, we found you can get this qualification called a TEFL certificate, and go overseas and teach. And yeah, at the time, I just remember feeling pretty exhausted with it all, and I was like, I really would like to do something with my life. I'd actually really like the experience of going overseas to teach. Do I really need to live in the United States and work here? I mean, like, not really. There was just nothing really keeping me necessarily in the United States at that point in my life. So I ended up getting a TEFL certificate, and I was looking at, I remember I was looking at Greece was the first country that I was interested in. But of course, they got hit probably worse than anyone by the financial crisis. So I decided that probably wasn't a good idea. And, Spain came up, but being American and not having, you know, passport in the Schengen region made it very difficult. So I started looking at different countries. Like I remember Taiwan was on there on the list, Japan, Korea. And I said, yeah, well, I've never been to Asia, so that's probably a good choice, see some new things. I've always been interested in Buddhism, for example. So Buddhist country was at the top of my list. And I ended up deciding on Korea because Korea ticked a lot of boxes for me. It's very modern. It's also, you can still access international things. It has large cities, but also very beautiful countryside. It's not nearly as expensive as Japan, which was a big plus for me at the time. Obviously, it's a Buddhist country, which very greatly interests me and still does. Some of the most beautiful temples I've seen actually are in Korea. That's definitely one reason to go. And yeah, I put my resume, got the training, got the TEFL certificate, and my 2 years of experience from high school, and my care job, and put that all on a resume, and put the resume on the jobs page on Dave's ESL Cafe. And like within a day, I was getting responses in email like, hey, I'd like to talk to you. We have this company in Busan, Seoul, whatever. And, like I remember within like 2 days, I had like 40 emails of people interested in talking to me about having a job. And then I talked to three, got two offers, if I remember correctly. And I decided on one that I thought would be the best fit for me. And yeah, and then I had to get some documentation, a background check and like the stamped documents and things like that. And once I got all that sorted, it took about 6 weeks. I was off to Korea at the end of February of 2012, it was.
That's really sudden. So because it sounded like in Portland, you felt quite stifled. You felt quite, things were moving really slowly. So how liberating was it when you put your CV up, your resume up,
Yeah.
and then you're almost within a day you're getting offers? Like how liberating what must that have felt?
Yeah, it felt great, because I hadn't had that feeling for a long time that like I was a skilled person who could be useful to a company or to a school. That was very uplifting for me, and it really gave me a lot of motivation to really go do it and try to do it as best I can. And that's exactly how it turned out. Yeah, that was a nice boost that I needed in my life at the time for sure. Yeah, then I got to Korea. I ended up working in it's the second largest city in South Korea called Busan. And I really enjoyed it even more than I thought I would actually. I discovered that Korean cuisine is definitely in my top five. Fell in love with Korean cuisine, and then Busan. I mean, the whole country, it's really developed. The infrastructure is excellent. They have really fast internet. I mean, it really has everything a modern country could give you. And Busan is one of the biggest port cities in the world. So I go from my previous situation to a city like Busan, which is at least 5 times larger than anywhere I lived before. It's a city of about 6.5 million people, maybe seven by now.
Wow, wow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fairly large by U.S. standards, although I think by Asian standards, pretty average size. But yeah, I go there and it's just there's parks, there's temples everywhere. I mean, it's like you see people exercise and playing badminton in parks. Which is something you don't see too often in the U.S. Uh, and I was just like, wow, this is a really lively place, and I mean, Busan is a very developed, very busy port city. It's got a lot of commerce, it's got a lot of trade, which are things that I like, and yeah, when I got there, yeah, my life took a turn for the better, and it was a decision that probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life to get that certificate and start teaching over there.
So tell us about the work that you did in Busan, which, by the way, has, I realize now, uh, about 1.5 million more than the population of Scotland.
Oh
That's a bit jarring.
wow.
Yeah. So tell us about the work in Busan, and how did it feel to be? I mean, obviously you taught before in an American high school, which from the outside, certainly from a sort of UK perspective, sounds like a kind of daunting thing. I mean,
Oh, it is, yeah.
yeah. What was that first classroom experience like in Busan, and what kind of schools were you working in?
Yeah, so the type of teaching you do at an American high school and the type of teaching you do just teaching English language, ESL, especially at a training center in Asia, they're really just two different animals. They're two different methods. I mean, kind of apples and oranges. The main thing they share is their teaching. Aside from that, they're pretty different. So yeah, my experience at the school in Busan there was overall very good. I mean, it's if I remember correctly, it was called YBM. It's the biggest company, English teaching company in South Korea. At least it was at the time. Maybe it still is. They have locations all over the country. They provided even more training over the TEFL certificate. They had their own in-house training, and the center I was at was a pretty small center. It was just me and two other teachers and the academic supervisor. The academic supervisor was a really good trainer. He was a really nice guy. He was from Amsterdam, but he went to college at Berkeley in California. And yeah, he ended up in Korea, if I remember correctly, similar to how I did. And yeah, he provided really good training, and I guess being from Amsterdam, he was like really laid back and understanding, as their reputation goes over there in Holland. And yeah, just a really cool guy, very understanding. Like if you made mistakes, he didn't make you feel bad about it. He would just point it out and say, let's avoid doing that again, for example. Whereas I remember my experiences in America were like very different. It's like if you make a mistake, they treated it almost as if it's apocalyptic, and it's like if you make a mistake, it's almost like they're saying you're a bad person and you should feel bad too. And his approach was totally the opposite of that. So yeah, I mean, I really feel like I got a lot of beneficial training there in South Korea, and then I had a really good experience with the students. South Korea provides really good benefits, and they have an excellent healthcare system. That was a nice benefit. You're protected by a contract in Korea. The pay is pretty good for the cost of living, and yeah, I just had a grand old time. One nice thing I remember is you would meet students, and in Korea they have this seniority system that comes from Confucianism,
Right.
and so if like you are a teacher, like you're technically their senior because they're the student, but it's also like an age thing. If they're older than you, they're a senior, and they have these rules about invitations. So for example, if somebody invites you to dinner, they have to pay because they invited you, and students would invite you all the time, just because they want to hang out and talk to somebody from a different country, I guess practice their English.
Yeah.
Is an ancillary benefit to that. Being in Korea, they probably don't meet a lot of Americans or, British or Australians, for example, and they'd like to take the opportunity to, meet one or try to get to know one, perhaps. But yeah, I remember there was a period there for about three, maybe it was a whole month actually, but yeah, there was a period of about 3 or 4 weeks, as I recall, where I had students invite me out to lunch and dinner almost every day. So there's a period of nearly a month there where lunch and dinner I didn't pay for nearly for a I think I didn't pay for a single meal for at least 3 weeks, which was pretty nice. And having fallen in love with Korean food, that's just a cherry on top. We got that long break because if you end up teaching adults, you're going to end up teaching a lot of business people and young professionals because they work from like 8 to 5. And sometimes their companies pay for the English training. So most of the English schools in South Korea, for adults anyway, you show up for early morning shift and it's usually like 7 to 9 or 7 to 10 or maybe 8 to 10. And then you have anywhere from 5 to 7 hours off in the middle of the day. And then you go back from like it could be 7 to 9 or 8 to 10 or maybe even 7 to 10 if you get 3 classes. That's called a split shift over there. And that's what most of the schools who teach professional people do.
Is it even with the best English lesson plans in the world and the best will in the world? Is it sometimes hard to engage students when they're just on a full shift of work, or did you find that people were really excited about finishing work and coming to do their lesson?
If you plan ahead and the school provides you good materials, or if you're expected to plan everything yourself, if you have good materials and know what you're doing and use the right techniques to teach them, it was usually fine. I mean, yeah, you could get some from time to time. Like you have a 9 o'clock class and they just got off a shift at work and they're tired, and yeah, that can be difficult. In those situations, I guess you just do your best. There are actually, I'm thinking this is probably true, in at least in every country in Asia where there's a lot of English teaching. Sometimes companies do pay for English class and make you take English classes, even though either they don't really need it or they don't really want it. I think Samsung, for example, I don't think they do it anymore, but back in the day, if you wanted to get a management position, it was expected that you would take English classes and eventually get a certain score on the IELTS or TOEFL test. And they had to do this like even if they never used English at their job, which really made no sense to me.
Yeah, that's quite strange.
So, people in that position who don't really need English but are kind of forced to take it for promotion. I mean, yeah, engaging them is could well, I shouldn't say is, but could be fairly difficult. So, I mean, the best you can do in that case is just come up with materials relevant to their business or professional interest and try to teach to that. And every lesson just upgrade their language skills a little bit through those materials.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with Arthur Sanford, who's going to tell us about his next move and the specific aspects of teaching that he liked the best.
Feeling inspired? Fancy trying something completely new? Well, make your best move yet by signing up for a TEFL course with the most highly accredited provider on the planet. Here at the TEFL org, we offer a range of online and classroom courses that you can study at your own pace. All of our courses include top-of-the-range teaching materials and come with dedicated tutor support from experienced and highly qualified TEFL experts. And what's more, we'll give you money off to do it. Just enter the code PODCAST at checkout to get 50% off any of our internationally recognised TEFL courses. And that includes our best-selling 120-hour Premier Online course. With that code, you'll not only get 50% off, but you'll also get a free lesson plans pack. Within a matter of months, you could be a qualified TEFL teacher, out there exploring the world or working to your own schedule from home as an online English teacher. Just use the code PODCAST at checkout to get started.
Right, and we're back with Arthur. So the next step was, you really enjoyed South Korea, but you did end up moving on. Tell us about what happened next and what inspired your move to China.
Yeah, actually today you know how sometimes you have two minds about something, and looking back, there are times where, Korea was so good to me, and I enjoyed it so much that I really wish I had stayed, at least stayed another year or even longer than that. I mean, I still go back as often as I can just to see it because I do like it so much. I think I've been back twice since. Yeah, my wife is often like, "Yeah, why don't you go to another country? You keep going." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, but this one's good, and there's still more to see. I mean, you can't see it all in one trip. Anyway,
Very true.
yeah. But then again, the other side of that is like, well, if you had stayed, you would have missed out on all these other things. I probably wouldn't have met my current wife. Things like that. So you just say, yeah, well, it all worked out as it should have, I guess. Yeah, I didn't leave Korea because I didn't get tired of it or anything like that. I was really debating for a long time whether I should stay or go, but I really had the urge to try teaching in other countries and just move around for a few years and then see which one I like the best or just which one suits my needs the most. I was going to do Japan and China, possibly Thailand and Vietnam, where I am now. But I ended up going to China because I just really wanted to see it. I knew about Hong Kong from previous experiences, and I remember really liking Hong Kong quite a bit. Still a big fan of Hong Kong. It's probably one of my favorite cities. Actually, probably my favorite city. Um, and yeah, so I ended up applying to a company and getting hired for a position in Shanghai. The idea behind it was, I was going to obviously experience China and, eat like dishes that you really can't get outside of China. Chinese food where we live is, by the way, completely different to what it is in the country.
Yeah.
So that's a nice thing to experience. Yeah, and I thought I'd try to learn some of the language and have some Chinese. That was the main reason for it, and yeah, so I ended up going to Shanghai and getting some more training there through the company I was working for. I was only in Shanghai for a few months, and then they had me move to a nearby city, only about an hour away, called Hangzhou, which is a pretty nice city actually.
You'd moved to Busan from Portland, big jump in terms of population, in terms of, the kind of city that is. So tell us about the move
hmm
to Hangzhou. China has these different tiered cities, with Shanghai obviously being a tier one city. So tell us about Hangzhou, because we've spoken to a few people who have taught in China,
hmm
but that's not necessarily a place that's come up.
Yeah, Hangzhou is.
Forgive my pronunciation. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah, Hangzhou is a tier two city. I think its population is about the same as Busan. It's like 6.5 or 7 million people. Yeah, the tier one cities are all like I think 15 million people or more, being Beijing, Shanghai, Chongqing, and Shenzhen. I think, and Chengdu. Those are the five. Oh, and Tianjin now. So those are the six tier one cities I'm aware of. So Shanghai was just kind of in transit. I wasn't going to stay there. I was just there for 3 months to train and fill in a position for somebody who had left one of the Shanghai offices. And then the idea was that I was going to go to Hangzhou where I would work more permanently. And that's exactly how it worked out. Yeah, Hangzhou, I believe, is like about 7 million, maybe 7.5 million now. But yeah, still for its size, still pretty busy. It's got a lot going on. It's got a beautiful lake there, which I could recommend, called Shihu, which means West Lake in Mandarin. I could recommend it for sure.
I believe you worked for EF English First, which is it's definitely a choice that a lot of TEFL course graduates end up making. What did that involve then? Was that a job where you would take different kinds of classes, you would go to different kinds of schools? How did that work for you? And what was it like in contrast to your experience in Busan?
I mean, they were mostly similar. It's the same kind of teaching. The nice thing about EF is they do provide training. and they do require you to take the Cambridge TKT teaching knowledge test, and you have to get a band 3 or higher to stay on with them, or if you don't, you have to retake. And that's a nice qualification to have, I think, because it proves you're good enough knowledge of grammar and the teaching skills to do the job. So that's a nice thing to put in your portfolio. I think the pay is about average for an English teacher in China. And unlike Korea, they don't have the split schedule. So some people really don't like the split schedule. I really didn't mind it at all. I actually kind of liked going in really early in the morning and then just having like 7 or 8 hours in between to do whatever I want, or even take a nap and then go back in the late evening. EF doesn't work like that. Maybe it's because of a different business schedule or something. I'm not really sure why, but it's like either 12 to 9 or 1 to 10, if I remember correctly. So you just work through the afternoon and evening into the early night at EF. I think that's how all their centers work, as far as I know. But yeah, I mean, it's the same methodology. They expect the same techniques and strategies that you would use in any other ESL school. So yeah, pretty much the expectations were the same as what they were when I was in Korea.
So I suppose I don't want to say stereotype, but the image that especially Westerners would have is that South Korea is a much more liberal country, especially, I mean, obviously, notwithstanding its neighbor to the north. But, it's a very sort of modern, democratic country, whereas I think China's seen as more kind of authoritarian, a very different kind of standard of living. What were your perceptions of, especially China, before you moved there, and what surprised you? What was different to how you'd imagined?
Yeah, well, hopefully when I discuss this, I won't get too political about it.
Sure, sure.
Well, the only part of China I really knew at the time was Hong Kong. Both because I'd actually been there, and because just we growing up in the United States as young men, I mean, we just loved kung fu films, and we got all that exposure to Hong Kong media. I mean, Bruce Lee
Of course.
was and still is a legend. We loved all that stuff. Jackie Chan, Chow Yun Fat, as we say in the West. All of that stuff. My image of China was the image of Hong Kong, and yeah, I knew about the that it was a British colony, that it had a different form of government. But just I guess being younger and slightly more ignorant back then, I suppose the image I had of the whole of China was my image of Hong Kong. And when I got to China, it was I don't want to say completely different, but like nearly completely different than what I expected to because of my exposure to Hong Kong. Yeah. So, but that didn't really bother me. I mean, that's something that you just get used to with inside of a couple of weeks. Yeah. I mean, comparing Korea and China, Korea is liberal parliamentary democracy. China is not. That does not affect your everyday life whatsoever. People have this image of China as, I guess, a police state where there's police like walking up and down the streets and on every corner just ready to haul you in for anything. Totally not the case. You really never see police. They do not really enter your lives in really any way. I mean, unless you do something really bad and they have to be called. But, it's not like in the United States, if you get drunk at a bar and you're walking down the street and you're stumbling, it's very likely that, police will put you in the drunk tank. In China, that would never happen. Korea too. If you're so drunk you can't walk, I mean, they'll just put you in a police car and take you home.
Right.
Whereas in America, you could expect to end up sleeping in jail for the night and paying a pretty hefty fine. In my experience, I mean, yeah, just the way the police handle the public in China is fairly hands off, and
Wow.
actually kind of the opposite to how they do in America. I mean, in America, it's like police are constantly intervening in people's lives and even places where they probably shouldn't be. I'd be surprised if that happened to you in China, to be honest. So, yeah, I mean, whatever the political regime as it is in China, I mean, it's just so at a different level than everybody's daily lived experience. Especially as a foreign teacher in China, where you're protected from some of these things quite a bit. Being a special worker situation, it really won't affect and really has nothing to do with your daily life while you're living and working in China.
So, over your experiences in China and South Korea, with the companies that you worked for, am I right in saying that you taught in international schools? You've taught with businesses, public schools. It'd be great for our listeners if you could explain kind of the pros and cons of the kind of places you've worked in. What the sort of differences are between them, if that's possible.
Yeah, I did end up going to Beijing after 2 years to teach. I taught at two international schools there for, I think, a combined 4 years, if I remember correctly. Um, or was it four academic years? So not quite 4 years, but you know what I mean. Yeah. So the pros and cons, the ESL like training centers, like what I worked at in Korea when I first got to China. They have more hours and the pay is lower. I mean, you don't really teach like for the money, right? But the pay is lower. I mean, that's just a fact. The two schools that I worked at in Busan and in Hangzhou, uh, both being YBM and EF, I mean, they are very corporate. They are very micromanaged. Well, the one I worked at in Korea, I mean, it was run by a guy from Amsterdam. It was very laid back, so he kind of didn't do that. But that's the company. I mean, if you end up in another center, it will be very micromanaged. So if you work for like the big chain schools, I mean, I would expect micromanagement. I would expect a lower salary than possibly what other schools pay, and probably more hours. But the advantage of that is they have a curriculum development department. And so they just expect you to teach that. So you don't have to do any planning. That saves a lot of work for you. So whereas if you work, say, in an international school, you're probably doing all your own lesson design and planning, which can take many, many hours in the day. So in that way, you might end up working as much or more. As in hours wise at an international school. I would say the main advantage of an international school is you don't really feel like you're working cubicle kind of office situation. A lot of those training centers are also in malls. That was a big complaint, especially in China. They expect to work at a school and they end up working at this place in a mall. They're like, really? I work in a mall? I mean, come on. If you work in an international school, you are going to work on a campus that's probably pretty nice. You might have your own office. The pay's a lot higher, typically by double.
All right. Okay.
You do have to do all your own planning, so there's a lot of work behind it, and the curriculum is different, so the standards are higher, and it's not specifically language teaching. You're teaching English language arts, so you're teaching English as a subject closer to, like, for example, IGCSE. So you're teaching like literary analysis and things like that instead
Right.
of, just like speaking or business English, for example. The international schools, you get more days off, you get the summer break. There's school trips, that you may have to go on or may not have to go on, but they're pretty cool to go on if you get invited. Yeah, there's more paid holidays. There's bank days from the government. But, it's also harder to get in the door at an international school. I do prefer that kind of work, but you have to put in the work to get the qualifications too. And many of those schools, they require a teaching license from back home, which I know a lot of people who are like, well, why should I put in all this time and effort and money to get a teaching license from, say, England when I'm working in China? I mean, it's just because they are international schools and they do teach that curriculum. And, for those of you who want to teach at an international school, I would say, do something like IB or IGCSE. at least get a certificate in that, do some training, even if you decide not to do a license. But a license can be a career boost. I mean, it is time and effort, but it can greatly pay off in the end.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to take another quick break, and I'll be right back with Arthur.
Are you looking for a weekly guide to what's going on in the TEFL world? Do you want some advice on everything from job interviews to underrated TEFL destinations? Well, the TEFL Org blog has it all. Every single week, we tackle some of the biggest questions in the TEFL industry. Stay up to date with the latest trends in English teaching, find tips to make your next job application your best yet, or get inspired and read about the experiences of TEFL Org graduates teaching all around the world. Whether you're brand new to the industry or you've seen it all, we can guarantee an interesting read each week. To find out more, go to tefl.org/blog. That's tefl.org/blog.
And I'm back with Arthur. So I know your time is very important, and we'll try and keep it as quick fire as possible. But whenever I use the word quick fire, I end up talking for much longer, so I'll try my best not to. It's close to Valentine's Day, so I had to ask. I thought it was really cool that you met your now wife, a graphic designer, while traveling and working abroad. So two questions there. Has expertise in graphic design ever helped you in the classroom, specifically with like visual learning? And what advice would you give to other couples who want to explore the world and work together?
Oh, yeah. I mean, most teaching today is done through PowerPoint and, embedded video. Things like VLC player come really in handy for that. There's just a lot more multimedia today. So I would say, get your PowerPoint skills and any graphic design skills up to date for designing materials and, just having that visual stimulus, something that looks well designed can go a long way towards student motivation. Well chosen videos and even, GIFs or GIFs, however you pronounce that. I found myself using in classes to teach for example, the present continuous with that ing, because GIFs are kind of a continuous loop of an image.
It's true, yeah.
Yeah, things like that. So, yeah, if you're already in a relationship and the both of you are thinking about going abroad teaching, you have what in academic circles they call the two-body problem, which in the United States, the way they look at it is it's next to impossible for two people to get a job at the same university. It's very rare that they're both going to apply to the university and get a job. So unlikely. I mean, it's really treated as an impossibility. It's not quite that bad, of course, with English language teaching. If you apply, to the same company and you have the right qualifications to pass the interview, I mean, you could end up at the same school. But I mean, I think most people don't actually want to work with family, So, I mean, even if you're at the same school, you could end up at different locations. But yeah, most people I know, I mean, just like in any other job, I mean, they work at two different places. So yeah, I mean, they live together. And I mean, plenty of people I know have both gone abroad to teach and, one gets a job at one school, one gets a job at another. And, they go to work and then they go home and, it's just kind of normal like that. You're both just teachers in a foreign country. I've never really heard anybody have any problem, both finding a job as English teachers in the same city. I've actually never met anyone who could not make that happen. So, I mean, that's not really very difficult to do, especially if you go, to South Korea, China, Japan. Well, Japan might be a little more difficult. It's not quite as big an industry there as it used to be. But if you put your time in, it'll happen. I think Vietnam, it would actually be pretty easy. Certainly Thailand, Laos, probably you'd be okay. Vientiane, you could both move there. As a matter of fact, any one of those countries I just named, except Japan, you can actually get hired from outside the country, and you would fly and have a job when you land. That's how most people do it. I should note that Japan, typically, they don't hire from outside anymore, but Korea still does. Yeah, Japan hasn't done that for a long time. Typically now you have to be in the country. And I believe you also asked me how I met my wife. We met when I was in Hangzhou. She was a university student there. at the China Academy of Art, which was founded by the Republic of China.
Okay.
That was when what's his name, Sun Yat-sen, was in power. They wanted an art school for the Republic. So it actually has a background in graphic design and doing graphic design and,
Yep.
of course, propaganda for the Republic of China, which was the government of China before 1949. That's how the school was founded. That's where she was studying. It's considered one of the top art schools in China, if not Asia, if I recall correctly. And yeah, I mean, I just met her because some of her friends were studying at the school I was teaching at. They're in Hangzhou, and they invited me out to dinner one day, as tends to happen, as I mentioned earlier. And she was with them, and we just got to know each other, and it took off. And I started visiting her college, which is one of the nicest campuses I've ever seen. If you ever go to Hangzhou, do visit the campus of the China Academy of Art, which locally they call it Guomei, is the Chinese name. It's definitely worth a visit. They have a lot of famous buildings, or a lot of buildings built by like famous architects and installations by graphic designers and visual artists and things like that. It's a pretty cool place. It's in the mountains, really nice. But yeah, I mean, just one thing led to another. We got to know each other. Then she graduated and she moved in with me because I was still working in Hangzhou. And then I think after about 7 or 8 months after she graduated, we moved to Beijing because I wanted to try a different city. And yeah, she ended up getting her first job at a graphic design studio there in Beijing. And while I was teaching at a international school, and we were there for 2 years. I was there for three, actually. Wait, three and a half, something like that. And she ended up leaving on the third year. She got accepted to the School of Visual Arts in New York City and ended up studying there for a year. And I stayed one last year to finish my contract with an international school where I was the coordinator. And then July of 2018, I finished my work there. I decided, yeah, it's time. Had to pack it up and go be with my fiance in New York, and that's where I've lived the past 4 years before I came to Vietnam.
That's such a cool story. There should be a film about that.
Yeah, thanks.
So we'll do, and I do mean quickfire this time, because I honestly could get you on for another episode, but I know your time's very limited. So
Yeah, we could do another episode one day.
yeah, for sure. In the meantime, though, let's make some good sound bites. You now work on the other side of it. You help to specifically with the TEFL org, you train future teachers. So I'm going to ask you very specific, quick-fire TEFL questions. Let's do this. What's your favorite aspect to teach, and what do you dread?
What's my favorite aspect to teach, and what do I dread? My favorite aspect to teach is, so I think empathy is the most important quality a teacher needs to have. And I really just love getting to know my students, because as you get to know them, you get to know what they need and, what personal things might affect them. And then you can use that to inform your class and your teaching in future lessons to them. It really allows you to personalize what you're doing in the classroom. So definitely getting to know the students. What I dread is, in my experience, most admin is not very good. So trying to meet the needs, not only my own needs, but the needs of the students, and what I think would be good for the school with what administration will allow is a constant and never-ending headache.
I can only imagine. What's your best piece of advice in terms of being flexible and willing to move, and how important is that attribute for TEFL teachers?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, as long as you're living in a country where legally and realistically, just a temporary worker, the visa in most countries as a foreign, professional English teacher can protect you from some of this. But I mean, the thing is, you are living in a foreign country, and I've seen people like For example, one day they just find out the school's closing because they're not doing so well. They don't have a job.
Oh,
They got to find a job. Like, for example, in China, mostly because of COVID, two of the biggest schools shut down there. Wall Street went bankrupt. They're no longer there. That was the biggest competitor to EF, I remember. And they're just out of business everywhere. I mean, they're not around. And then Disney English, which focuses on kids, obviously, um, I mean, they're still in business, but they just decided to pull out of China after COVID. I guess it just wasn't reaping any benefits for them anymore. So, I think I think it was like 40, 50, or 60,000 teachers found out pretty quickly, like, they were owed back pay and then the schools just closed. And I think it's possible a lot of teachers lost a few months of pay and had to move. I have noticed a lot of Americans are coming to Vietnam recently. Most of the teachers I met here are from South Africa. A lot of South Africans really like to come here. Great people, by the way, all really good people that I met. Really friendly, good teachers, really, really nice people to get along with. But I've noticed more and more Americans coming in because I think after COVID, they just couldn't find work or their school shut down in China and they just had to find a new country. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, there could be political things that happen. Like if you're working in Thailand, they do every few years, there is some political crisis that they have between some political party's leader and the king. There are political parties who don't want a monarch, and sometimes it comes to a crisis in Thailand and everything just shuts down. And you could find yourself out of work for a while, and you might think about maybe moving to another country, perhaps a more stable situation, I mean, yeah, I just think it makes sense as long as you're a foreign teacher, not a citizen, certain protected rights in that country. You should definitely have, I guess I'll call it a back pocket move just in case.
that's very, very good advice.
Yeah, although I will say in Korea, you do get all the same rights as Korean citizens. That visa does protect you. I can't really speak to other countries, and I'm not sure about Vietnam. Things aren't as transparent here. But yeah, in Korea, I think basically anything in the Geneva Conventions holds. So while you're in Korea, even as a foreign worker, you could be expected to have all the same legal rights as a citizen. Universal health care, for example, they'll give you.
Amazing.
You get it all there.
So, three very, very quick questions. First one, what's the oddest or most unusual home comfort you've missed when you've been traveling or working? Like, was there anything you thought, I didn't think I'd miss this? Why do I miss this?
You mean from the U.S.?
Yeah.
I guess bookstores in my native language. But then again, you find, you find in Asia that apartments are quite smaller, so you probably don't want to, especially since you should always have a back pocket move on the ready just in case. You probably don't want to load yourself with a bunch of bookshelves full of books that you're going to have to haul somewhere else,
It's very true. What piece of advice do you wish you'd been given before embarking on a career in TEFL?
I'm not sure about that one. I mean, what piece of advice do I wish I had been given? Probably I wish I had known that for most international schools, I need a state licensure, so a teaching certificate from your home state or country. Can get you access to better jobs. So there's not been a problem for me, but I have met a lot of people who, maybe were turned down or just can't seem to get in at a really high quality international school with a bigger paycheck and nicer benefits and more time off just because they don't have that license.
And finally, what piece of advice would you give to someone who's on the verge of studying TEFL but isn't quite convinced yet?
If you really are tired of, I guess, the rat race and just tired of, all the habits of your daily life where you are and want to do something different, I really think you can't go wrong with teaching English abroad. I mean, it's a nice job. You get to meet a lot of cool people, try great food. And typically, I mean, even in Vietnam, for example, the salary is pretty high for the cost of living. So, I mean, any of the countries I've been, you can lead a pretty good life. Even though it seems like a small salary back home, here it's really good. Economies of scale, right? So, I mean, while you're here, you can definitely lead a pretty good and comfortable life, in my experience.
Brilliant. Well, Arthur, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Firstly, because I'm glad that we managed to get a whole recording done.
Yes, we finally did it.
We finally did it. And secondly, because there's so much I wanted to ask you, and we definitely need to get you on another time if possible. But it's been great talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to I Taught English Abroad, a podcast series by the TEFL org. To keep up to date with every episode, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your streaming platform of choice. And we love feedback, so feel free to leave us a review on any platform you like. For more information about the TEFL org, or about teaching English as a foreign language in general, head on over to tefl.org. That's TEFL.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.